Welcome to the LSI Behind the Wind podcast. My name is Sean Slatter, and for 30 years, I've dedicated my life to the science of business development. I've seen the impact of our work, which has evolved into economic development and now social impact. In this episode, I'm really excited to be joined by Congressman Chris Stewart. Congressman Stewart is a longtime friend and champion of LSI and our work, even prior to his being elected into the Congress. We work closely with Congressman Stewart in his business. We have worked with the congressman and his staff for many years as he has served in the Appropriations Committee and also the Intelligence Committee. And we're working with Congressman Stewart and his staff on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, and also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, BIL. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with Congressman Stewart. He's a former Air Force pilot, B-1 pilot, and he's a prolific author and has just written a new book, which we talk about. And I think you'll really enjoy this conversation and perspective that Congressman Stewart has on the state of the Congress, the BIL or IIJA, and also his role in the Intelligence Committee, especially now as we look at this conflict or potential conflict with Russia and the Ukraine. So enjoy this conversation. It was fantastic catching up with my friend, Congressman Chris Stewart. Congressman Stewart, thank you so much for joining me this morning for this episode. For those of our listeners that aren't familiar with your background, could you just talk a little about your upbringing and some of your career prior to becoming a U.S. Congressman?
Sure. Well, thanks, Sean, first for giving me a chance to be with you today. And I've been looking forward to it. And I really mean that. So it's always fun to talk with you. And, we love your background and the story of you and your company. And it's a great American success story. So, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
And look, I won't take a lot of time. I know people are not fascinated so much by my personal background, but I grew up milking cows up in Cache Valley from a family of 10 kids, if you can imagine.
Amazing.
I mean, that's just truly amazing to me now that I'm a father of 6 kids, which is a large family now. But on my suit lapel, all the time I wear a set of miniature Air Force wings that were my father's wings. He was a pilot in World War II. Of those 10 kids, 6 sons, 5 of us served in the military. So I served in the military as well. I was an Air Force pilot, flew combat rescue helicopters and the B-1, which is one of the coolest aircraft ever built. Really fast, 84 500-pound bombs, and we could hit 84 different targets with them. It was a really impressive airplane. In fact, this is kind of fun. I have 3 world speed records, including the fastest nonstop flight around the world, and that's in the B-1. It's because it's a big, fast airplane that can go a long, long way. After serving the military for 14 years, I started writing books, and I came home one day and as I said, I had 6 kids, and I thought it's just not fair for my kids to have me be gone all the time the way I was, especially as a pilot. And I thought, I think it's time for us to do something, kind of our next stage in life. And when I say that, maybe I took the easy way out, because it was an enormous sacrifice for our family. But my gosh, thank heaven for those people who do serve, for those people who are on, their second, third, fourth deployment, which is 6 months or a year. And Sean, I know, your work with the military, you're very, very aware of that as well. And thank heaven for their families who support them,
Absolutely.
Including people in my own family now. And I think about them all the time, these young mothers who are home with, young children, and their husbands are gone for months and months at a time. And sometimes it's a father who stays home, and his wife and the mother is deployed, and we're grateful for them. And anyway, I started writing books. I've written, a bunch of books. In fact, I had a book come out last week or 2 weeks ago.
I look forward to talking to you about this.
Yeah, multiple New York Times bestseller. And then one day, about 9 years ago, someone called me and said, "You should run for Congress." And they just redrawn the boundary lines. And I had been drawn, I was in Rob Bishop's district prior to that. And I was in Jim Matheson's district after the new boundaries. And they said, "You should run against Jim." And I thought, I'm going to do that. And shortly after, I found myself in Congress. So it's an honor to serve. And it's been, in many ways, a real highlight for my family and I. So I went too long. That was too much, but there's my background.
You have such an interesting background, and we've been privileged to work with an organization that was set up by President Eisenhower and the first Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, and their belief was that at some point that the Congress would forget about the importance of national security. And sure enough, that was very prophetic. There are so few members of the Congress now that served or even had a family member serve. And so I really value your perspective and your background, especially through your service, Congressman.
Well,
So thank you so
so,
much.
so thank you. And that's worth elaborating on. I mean, historically, Congress and executive have been populated by people who have served. I mean, it's been as high as 70, 80%. And we Republicans have tried to recruit veterans. We've worked hard to bring veterans to Congress. And yet, even with those efforts, right now it's about 13% of Congress is all that are veterans. And I mean, it's just a dwindling number. And it's important because as we look at the world right now, all our eyes are on Ukraine and Russia. And, we have this persistent threat from China and the mullahs in Iran and North Korea with nuclear weapons and narco-terrorism. And I mean, the list goes on and on. A perspective from people who have served in the military is very, very important in that decision making. So, some of us are concerned that we've lost a lot of those voices. And if anyone's listening to this podcast and you're a veteran, please consider serving, whether it's in your local school board or a city council or, in Congress or the Senate, whatever it is, please consider serving because, again, we need the voice of people who have served their country already in some of the most dangerous and threatening manners they could. And it brings a certain perspective that's very important.
Absolutely. And especially with your roles in appropriation and also on the intelligence committees, I think that you bring this background and depth that is so valuable. And I want to talk about that in a minute. Before we do, you mentioned you're a very prolific writer. I think you've written 15 books. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's a few more than that, but I'm
More,
not sure.
more than that.
Yeah.
Maybe I've read 15 of your books, but your newest book, The Final Fight for Freedom, How to Save Our Country from Chaos and War. I'm so excited to read this. As you said, it came out just 2 weeks ago and is doing well. It could not be more timely with what's happening in our relationship with China and Russia. Could you just talk a little about your book and what compelled you to write this?
Well, again, thank you. And I know the purpose of this podcast isn't to sell books for Chris Stewart, but thanks for letting me mention it. Not because I want to interest people in the book, but because it's just such a topical subject for our day. And it's taken me more than 3.5 years to write this book. And part of the reason was, I wrote a part, and then the world changed so quickly that it was no longer relevant, or it had already been discussed. And I think if you were to ask the American people, well, in fact, we know this because if you ask people, are we on the right track or is our country on the wrong track? I mean, something like 74% of them now say we're on the wrong track. And that's a really interesting response. It's higher than it's ever been. And of course, some of that is the pandemic and other things. But I mean, a lot of people just have a sense that, the foundation of our nation is really being threatened right now. And so the premise of the book is two things. One of them is, as Abraham Lincoln said, and so did Ronald Reagan and other of our conservative leaders, they said, a foreign nation will never destroy our country. And I truly believe that. As frightening and as serious as I take China and the rise of China, I don't believe China will ever defeat us militarily. But as Abraham Lincoln said, the only way this country fails is if we commit national suicide. And many people feel like that's what we're in the middle of doing right now. Some of the things that we do just make no sense. And some of it is designed to weaken and to divide us. And so the first premise of the book is that, we have to stop that. And it talks very specific about things that, that lead us along that path. And then the second idea is that at some point our adversaries will act. They'll look at a weakened the U.S. and they'll say, now is the time. And we're seeing a small example of that in the Ukraine right now, which I hope we have a bit of chance to talk about. But I mean, it's very, very clear, and the intelligence on this is very specific, that Vladimir Putin looked at this time and the condition of the United States, and he said, this is the time for me to move. And so he's going to. And so I think and then our adversaries use that weakened condition to, again, kind of bring us to our knees. I mean, create just chaos that's hard for us to come back from. And China can do that without ever firing a weapon or without ever firing a missile at the United States. They can do it with cyber attacks. They can do it with quantum computing, which is just a fascinating subject we discuss. They can do it with biologically designed weapons, and the list goes on. And then finally, to conclude the book, we have to provide some answers, and there are answers. There is a way that we can save our nation, and it begins with, stopping this process of divisiveness and the contention and the emotion that so many of us feel, and try to minimize that. And that's kind of the solution, or the final part of the book is providing a solution. So again, I think it's just I hope an accurate description of where we are in our world and what the future is going to look like, and how we can make that future much, much brighter instead of some of the pessimism that so many people feel.
I think it's your perspective is so interesting on a potential conflict with Russia or China or both, and that it really is going to be a very different conflict than we've seen previously. It is likely going to be a technology conflict. Could you talk about what would you think a conflict with a superpower now looks like?
Well, I think one of the good ways to answer that is to look at what Russia has done in the Ukraine up to this point. And I think we can draw some lessons from that. It's not recognized, perhaps by everyone, but they've been at war now for 7 years, and 14,000 Ukrainians have died in this war. But it's not just, forming a battle line and going out and attacking the enemy. And it's not, like we envision in Fallujah, where you have a squad of soldiers going, say house to house, looking for terrorists, looking for threats. It's much different than that. The term that many people use is full spectrum warfare. So it might include cyber attacks, for example, which Russia is very, very good at. Oh my gosh, it scares the life out of us when we have insight into the capabilities that Russia has regarding a cyber attack. And I mean, honestly, they could destroy our entire electrical grid at any moment if they chose to. And there's very little we can do to stop them. Now, we can retaliate against them, which is the reason that they don't do that. But it's really frightening how they hold our nation at such risk. Well, they use those same tools in the Ukraine. And so they've had multiple cyber attacks in the last 10 days. They'll use what we call little green men, which are people that, and China is very, very good at this as well. And Hong Kong is a great example of them using this same concept. And that is, they're not soldiers dressed in a uniform and with a helmet and a rifle. They're soldiers, or in some cases, other security, from other security agencies, but they're dressed in civilian uniforms. And they kind of melt into the general population, and they act as insurgents, they act as insiders, they cite, they kind of stir up emotion and in some cases sabotage. And Russia's been very, very good about using Russian assets in the eastern region for the last several years. It includes attacks on financial institutions. It's one of the things that we completely expect would happen, is that Ukrainian banks and financial institutions would lose their ability to do any of their normal transactions, which when you think about living in Ukraine and having your bank just shut down and you having no access at all to your banking needs or some of the money you might have in the bank. And that would last not for a couple hours or a couple days, it could last for months. And then lastly is we know that Russia has some plans, and we hope they don't implement these plans, but I mean, targeted attacks, targeted assassinations, taking people and rounding them up and sending them back to camps in Russia. I mean, it could be some of the things that we've seen with the Uyghurs in Western China, for example. So there's a broad range of capabilities that our adversaries have, and they're not afraid to use them.
I really appreciate how you have advocated for investing in technology and equipment in over the last several years. And I'm so excited to read your new book. I just got a copy of it last week, and so I look forward to it. It could not be more timely with what's happening today in the Ukraine and also our ongoing conflict with China. Congressman, could you talk for a minute? You have really been so active on a couple of committees, the Intelligence and Appropriations, and I've got some questions about your role on the Appropriations Committee. Could you talk a little about serving in the Congress and your role in both of these very important committees?
Yeah, I love my work in Congress on the Intelligence Committee. I've said this before. When you go to Congress, it's a little bit like being a freshman in high school. You feel a little lost. You don't know who your friends are. And you kind of look around and you go, well, where do I fit in? Am I going to join the choir? Am I going to be, play sports, be a jock? Am I going to be one of the Navy kids? And everyone kind of finds their way. And for me, it was always really clear with my background. I wanted to serve on the Intelligence Committee, and I wanted to work in national security. And the two committees I have, Intelligence and Appropriations, are both what they call A committees. There's only 4 of the 23 committees are A committees, and it's very hard to get on them. Getting on the Intelligence Committee is far and away the hardest committee to be appointed to, and Appropriations is one as well. But I mean, the work on the Intelligence Committee is, as I've described, it's quantum computing, it's artificial intelligence, it's how are we managing human assets in Beijing or in Moscow or in Jordan. I mean, it's just fascinating stuff. But the work I do on appropriations is every bit as important and in some ways more important. And so, Sean, you and I have talked about a number of issues that, you came to my office back in Washington a couple of weeks ago, and we went through a list of things that, you're doing and your company is doing. And it's for the good of society and for good of our government, for the good of our defense, that we have companies and partners like you. So how do we help you? How do we help our constituents? And I'm a fiscal conservative, and I think one of the great concerns we have as a nation is the amount of money we're spending. But once we've decided we're going to spend a certain amount of money, then I have responsibility to make sure that we're trying to help the people in my district or the people in my state. And the Appropriations Committee is a very powerful position to be able to do that, because at the end of the day, we actually are the ones who decide where every dollar is spent. And I think it's been 50 something years. It's been since the 1970s that Utah had someone on the Appropriations Committee. And, I'm honored to be able to be on that committee, because we really can help our friends and help our constituents in our home state by, sitting in that position.
I could not agree more. I was so excited when you were appointed to serve on the Appropriations Committee, and especially with what's happened over the last 6 months. As you and I have talked about, our company has been very focused on the bipartisan infrastructure law, now what was previously being referred to as the Investment, Infrastructure, and Jobs Act, IIJA. And it really is an opportunity for a lot of communities to capture that funding and use that funding for infrastructure and technology as well to create jobs. And could you talk a little about what your thoughts are? As you said, you are fiscal conservative. The Congress did pass this bill, and the president signed this into law the end of November. And now this funding is being pushed to the agencies. Eventually, it's going to be pushed to communities via formula, but also there are a lot of opportunities. About half of that $1.3 trillion is going to be captured by communities through competitive grants and RFPs. And I mean, talk about how your district, the second district, and other communities have an opportunity to capture this funding and use it for the benefit of these communities.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up. As I said, and as you reiterated, I'm a fiscal conservative. But on the other hand, there are certain responsibilities that the federal government has to accomplish, and one of them, interestingly, they're one of the few that are actually listed in the Constitution. One of them is the post office, postal service, and the other is transportation, roads and bridges.
Right.
And look, a community such as Salt Lake or Utah couldn't build the new airport. We couldn't build the roads that we need. Communities on the coast can't build the ports that they need. I mean, there's a real role for the federal government to assist in those kind of projects. They're just too big for many states or local communities to be able to fund on their own. And so I have a couple priorities. One of them is, as I said, to have that money spent where it makes sense, to not waste that money. And that's actually the second thing. And that is, that the money is accountable, that it doesn't go to, a good example was the Solyndra that many of us remember from the Obama administration, where, we essentially guaranteed $500 million loan that the federal government ended up paying because it was invested in a company that truly didn't deserve it. And so I think one of our focuses is to not make those kind of mistakes, make sure the money is spent on things that are very obvious to the public benefit and not speculating on emerging technologies that the market should be doing, not the federal government. So with those two priorities in mind, then, it comes down to things like, well, we need a dual track for public transportation here in Utah for the rail system. It's very expensive. That's something we want to help with. It's building an interchange on the freeway down in St. George. It's building a water project like we did for the city of Centerville. I mean, these aren't very sexy. They're not the kind of things that are going to get a lot of headlines, but they're very important to the future of the state. And Sean, the last thing I'd maybe mention on that is, whether we like it or not, Utah is going to continue to be one of the fastest growing states in the country. There's something special about this place, and there always has been. And people recognize it. And more people are going to be moving to Utah because they want to be a part of it. And honestly, some of them are fleeing the place where they live because they no longer feel comfortable putting their kids in public schools, or housing is just so expensive, which is a challenge that we have here as well. Or the jobs are just available to them. Or maybe they're working on the East Coast, but they realize I can work on the East Coast and live in Park City if I choose. So Utah is going to continue to grow at a much faster rate than I think any other community or any other state in the nation. And we have to have these investments so that when that happens, we can protect our quality of life for the people who do live here.
I love all of those things that you talked about. I mean, and we're really working closely with community leaders and organizations to accomplish all of those things that you had mentioned: transportation and energy, environmental remediation, and bringing broadband to rural communities. And so it really is an opportunity now for many of these communities, especially rural and disenfranchised communities, which there are many in your congressional district that we're actively working with today, to capture that funding and ensure that it's to the benefit of those communities. And I really appreciate your vision and your support in advancing this infrastructure law going forward.
Well, and Sean, you bring up something really important for the state. And honestly, this goes back to a conversation with you and some executives from your company from probably more than a year ago, or maybe about a year ago now. But that was, again, as we sat together and talked, and you're the one who brought up that the state leaders and the legislatures, and also the governor, was focusing on the rural communities. And, if you look at a map of the state, and just very quickly, it looks like my district, the second district, is about half the state. It's not quite, but it's a big chunk of the state. So I have downtown Salt Lake City and, Davis County, but I also have, just some of the most remote parts of the entire country. And those challenges that the people there face are very different than the challenges that my constituents in Salt Lake City face. And I'm really glad, and we appreciate your support in trying to move some of these resources and some of these opportunities to the rural part of the state as well, because they've been challenged, and we know that. And I also am fearful that the drought and other things that we really can't affect, we can't change that, and we're going to have to find ways to compensate for that. And I think you've indicated your support and the state support in making them a priority as well.
There's so much of this funding that is going to be dedicated to water, clean energy, and it really is our overall strategy for rural parts, especially in your district, is we're really excited about it. Actually, that I think there's it is a once in a generation opportunity for some of these communities to achieve and move forward with infrastructure priorities. So we are very focused on working with you and your team and the various organizations, including municipalities, to make this happen. Congressman, let me ask you this. As I said, you are such a prolific writer. When do you have time, and how this is such a discipline? It really is like a lot of things I assume in your life is about discipline. How do you make writing a priority?
Well, I've got a special cover on my computer, and I write while I shower a lot of times. It's funny because I've always been a writer. I mean, well, not always, but I mean, I've been a writer for 20 something years. I wrote my first 2 books while I was in the Air Force. I was a small business owner while I was writing, and now I'm in Congress while I'm writing. And so it's something I've kind of grown used to. It honestly is, since in the last 3 years, it's been 2 things. One is I just write late at night. I always have, and I'm kind of a night owl, so I'll stay up late at night and write. And then I've got 8 or 9 hours a week on the airplane, right? And that's what I've spent a lot of my time doing is writing while we're flying back and forth between my home here in Farmington and Washington. So I've been able to use that time. But the last thing on that, Sean, is writing for me is something that I enjoy. I honestly feel like if you've got something to say, whether it's a story or whether it's this idea that our nation's in great peril, I feel like I kind of have to write, like I've got to get it on paper. And so it's not just a chore for me. It's something that I really quite enjoy. And I think that helps.
It's your own therapy. I've kept a journal for over 30 years, and I have over hundreds of journals that I've filled, and I feel the same way. You're a very gifted writer, and it is a discipline. It's like a training for a marathon or anything else. It is, you need to do it consistently, and you get better over time. As we wrap up, one of my favorite books is Seven Miracles, and when I had read that, I knew that you and I shared a lot of similar thinking. But can you just talk about Seven Miracles for a minute? I think it's a very important body of work.
Yeah, well, you're kind. Thank you. It's been many years now since that came out, but there's an interesting story behind that. I mean, the whole premise of it was, there's something extraordinary, there's something exceptional about the United States, and I say that without any shame at all. I mean, some people say you can't say that, and I said, of course you can. I'm not saying we're better than other countries as a people individually. I'm just saying there's something extraordinary about this nation. It's something exceptional, and God intended it to be that way. And we have been, whether we want to recognize it or not, it's true. We've been a light to the world for more than 200 years. And so the premise of that book was, that there's always opposition to freedom, as we see today, and that opposition is growing, and there always has been. But when there was this opposition to freedom, we think there were some extraordinary circumstances and some extraordinary times when God actually stepped in and provided a miracle to ensure the preservation of this nation, so that we could continue to be that light and that model to the world. And Sean, I think you and I both know too that I'm not saying our nation is perfect and has always been perfect. In fact, quite the opposite. We have had our flaws, and slavery is one of the most obvious ones of those. But we've been willing to confront our flaws and to try to get better, which is, again, one of the exceptional characteristics of this country is, we think now more than 700,000 people we lost their lives in the Civil War as they fought to, eliminate this stain of slavery, as they fought actually to bring, true equal rights to all people in the country. And I mean, the list just goes on and on of things that we thought, we've got to do better at than this, and we've tried to. So that's kind of the premise of it is, that this is an extraordinary country and God still cares about our future, which is why this other book to me is so, it's just such a sobering look at our future. And I continue to have that hope. But I also recognize that, we as a people we've got to get a couple things right here, or our future is just going to be very different for our children and our grandkids than what it was for us. And so I try to reconcile those two things, hope and optimism in our future, but also a realistic, kind of realistic idea of where we really are. And I continue to have this great faith in our country, but we really do have to get some things right in the next few years.
Congressman Stewart, thank you so much. I really appreciated this discussion, and thank you for your service in our military and our Congress, and I admire your work. And I'm really excited to read this new book, The Final Fight for Freedom, How to Save Our Country from Chaos and War. Appreciate all you're doing, appreciate your friendship, and really continue fighting for these causes. It's amazing.
Well, thank you. And let me close by just saying again, Sean, thanks for the opportunity. I said earlier about how you are the, kind of the quintessential American dream. You started this small company and you've built it into just such an amazing organization. And I'm sure you take great pride in that, as you should. And so does your team, the people you have around you. But, everything that we do in government or in DC, we can't do it without partners. We can't do it without people and companies and organizations like you who can actually implement the policies and bring that good to the people. So thanks for doing that. And we look forward to working with you many years in the future.
Appreciate it. Have a great day and look forward to talking to you later.
Thanks, Sean.
Take care. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation that I had with Congressman Chris Stewart. What an amazing individual. And please buy his new book, which could not be a more appropriate topic as we look at our relationship with China and Russia, especially now. The Final Fight for Freedom, How to Save Our Country from Chaos and War. I received a copy of his book, and I'm really excited to read it. We'll link everything that we discussed in the episode notes. And then also, if you are a municipality, if you're a state or have responsibility for economic development, please let us know what your priorities are and how we can help you capture some of this funding. This $1.3 trillion of funding that is going to be pushed to the federal agencies and then awarded to communities through formulas and competitive grants. We would love to work with your organization to help you capture a piece of this $1.3 trillion that's going to be pushed in the next several months. Thank you for listening. It's such a pleasure to have this opportunity to discuss so many important topics with Congressman Stewart.